The movie opens with sweeping music and scenes of mountains and the countryside. It almost feels more like an epic western at first, as opposed to film noir. But then we pan over to a highway sign showing distances to places like Los Angeles and Reno and signaling that we are actually in a more modern setting. And then we see a car traveling down the highway. It's a convertible. It goes to Bridgeport, which was one of the names on the sign. Stops at a gas station that has a sign up top that says Jeff Bailey. A slick city guy in a hat and overcoat gets out. He's looking for Bailey. The kid at the gas station is deaf, but he indicates that Bailey will be back sometime today. At the cafe across the street, we learn that Bailey is dating a woman named Anne, and another man named Jim is in love with her too. The stranger asks about Bailey. The waitress says, "You know him?" And he says, "I might have, once." He explains that he happened to drive through town and see the name on the sign. It turns out that Bailey is fishing with Anne, and they are in love, and she longs to see the world. He's been a lot of places, but he's happy staying right there. And she makes reference to how mysterious Jeff is. She hasn't known him that long. He's kind of secretive. And then the kid interrupts them and he signs to Jeff. Back at the station, Jeff seems to know this city slicker, whose name is Joe. And Joe tells him that Whit wants to see him. There's clearly a past history between these three characters. Jeff is suspicious of Whit's intentions, but Joe says he just wants to see you. Maybe he's got something nice for you. So Jeff eventually agrees, kind of like he has no choice, to go to Lake Tahoe in the morning and see Whit. Jeff invites Anne to ride with him so he can tell her something that might hurt her. So now that we're riding in the car and it's a nighttime drive, we're in darkness, and it starts to feel very, very noir as Jeff tells her about his past in flashback. So this is kind of the opening sequence, the setup. What are your thoughts on this?
People are very cynical in this movie. You know? So remember when we did the slasher films and we were getting into the formula of slashers, and we'd come into movies where it's like, yeah, slashers have about 7, 8, 9, 10 elements in them, and generally a good slasher has a touch of everything. And I remember when we were watching Halloween, or talking about Halloween, and it seemed like Halloween had a lot of those elements, but it really emphasized on one of the elements a lot, which is the stalking part. And there is some stalking in almost all slashers, but Halloween really seemed to like use that as like the basis of it. It's just a lot of stalking, not a high body count, a lot of stalking. With this, there are a lot of elements to film noir. Cynicism is a huge element. This movie is so cynical. It is just like that's the thing that stuck out to me the most. There's a lot of quipping. Almost feels like a Marvel movie or a Joss Whedon movie, where it's just like every character is clever. It's like every character can't be clever. It's like every character has like the perfect thing to say at the perfect time. They're all very clever. So the dialogue was great. And through all the quipping, there's a lot of character development. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of wasted characters. Every character you see on screen is achieving something, or we're going to come back to them at some point. So it was very efficient, I felt. Like the first 10 minutes or so of this movie, super efficient. They didn't waste any time. The dialogue was very dense, not necessarily saying that there's a lot of story going along, but there's a lot of character development and a lot of nice dialogue within. Like it's like like they almost got to replay it to catch all the clever lines in there. So the dialogue was great. The cynicism is on an all-time high. It's breaking the charts, and I'm definitely intrigued. It has a lot of the film noir elements in there, and I would definitely want to see more.
Yeah, me too. I love a lot of the lines in this movie. That's one of my favorite aspects. A lot of great lines. And I love the opening here, and I love that we just kind of suddenly enter this very dark world of the car as we're about to flash back into what you just know is going to be a very, very film noir story. So, um, first thing that Jeff tells her is that his name isn't Bailey, it's actually Markham, and that he and a guy named Jack Fisher used to be partners, private investigators in New York. And Whit Sterling, who's a high rolling gambler, wants to hire Jeff and not his partner because Jeff is both smart and honest, which is a rare combination. He wants Jeff to find his girlfriend who shot him and stole $40,000. He says he doesn't care about the money and he promises that she will not be harmed. Jeff is kind of reluctant to get involved, but when he's promised $10,000 plus expenses, he can't resist. And as he's leaving, he says, "By the way, what's her name?" "Kathy Moffat." As they walk out together, Jack Fisher insists on getting half of the fee, even though he won't be going with Jeff. And Jeff agrees to that. Any thoughts on this little section?
Yeah, I mean, dimples were big back then. I think we've talked about this
Yes.
several times about having cast members that look too much alike. And Kirk Douglas and Robert Mitchum, at least the young versions of them, look a lot alike, and they both have that dimple in the chin. I don't know if this is an old wives' tale or how dimples actually occur, but you know, mothers pushing their fingers into a baby's chin or in their cheeks as they're young, continuously doing that, and then they'll develop dimples. Sounds like an old wives' tale, but I don't know if there's any validity to it. But dimples aren't something you see a lot now,
No.
as much as you used to see it back then, because it was a sign of beauty back then, as opposed to what it is now, which is, you know, a dimple. Um, but yeah, a lot of the other film noir elements come in. You get the flashbacks, you get the detective, you get the potential for double crossing, you get the mysterious characters, and you get the you know, the quest for the femme fatale and the build up for the femme fatale. There's no better way to have a femme fatale than to talk about her before you see her. Get that build up, that anticipation of seeing her on screen, and then seeing where her allegiances really lie, as opposed to just seeing her. So a lot of the other elements start coming together, and another thing I noticed too is when you really think about film noirs, because when I always used to think about film noirs, I'm thinking like, oh, these are movies made before I was born. They're from a different generation. They're older movies. Older people like them. You think old, 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 old. But when you really think about film noir, there's a lot of young people in it. It's a lot of contemporary dialogue for the time. All this snappy dialogue now would be like street slang now, where it's just like
Mhm.
a person my age or your age may not even understand everything they're actually saying. You know,
Yeah.
if we're talking about like a film made today with the elements of noir in them, they would be like, you know, rappers in there. There would be like young people in there. I looked at the age of Greer in this movie. She was 23 when she made this.
Wow.
Jane Greer. So we're talking about
Yeah.
young people in this movie. Jazz music is in here. Jazz music is the equivalent of like rap or hip hop music, you know? So it's like
Yeah.
you think of it as an old movie, but it was very contemporary and a young person's movie at the time. So yeah, that just kind of dawned on me in watching this when I saw him in the jazz bar or club. I'm thinking, oh, that'd be like, you know, a completely different environment today.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of interesting elements setting up, more film noir aspects coming in, and something that I didn't think of the first time I saw this. In generally, the purpose of a flashback is to give a subjective opinion on the events that happened.
Mhm.
And when I first saw this movie, I didn't think of it the flashback as being subjective because it's our lead character, and like Kirk Douglas says, he's an honest guy. So you almost say his version is the truth, but even though it's the truth to us, it's not the truth to his girlfriend, because that kind of enhances the ending. Because we view it as a truth, but if we're taking it from her perspective, we don't know like how much of this does she believe or not believe. So then later on, when he says he's not in love with her, and then the guy at the gas station says he is, then again, that she look at this more of like something as subjective. So even though we're looking at it as a truth, it's kind of interesting to look at it from her eyes. The person he's actually telling the story to is like, how much of this is she believing or not believing?
Yeah, definitely. And what you're saying there about the young cast, I mean, I think one thing for me is these guys are all wearing suits, and so they automatically look older to me, because we didn't wear suits when we were young, but I don't even wear a suit now, so it's the world has changed. Adults look different now than they used to, but that used to be a sign of adults, suits, hats, that kind of a look. One other thing that I couldn't help but think as I was watching, it was reminding me just a little bit of the Maltese Falcon in the sense that we have a detective who seems like a pretty good guy, but he's got this partner detective who seems like he's a little sleazy, which is kind of what happens in the Maltese Falcon at the beginning there. There's a little bit of difference between the two guys. But anyway, that's just a vague thought.
No, I thought the same thing too, except the only
Yeah,
thing is it's reversed in
yeah.
that the sleazy character was Bogart in the Maltese Falcon, and he took the case. Well, no, it's the good guy took the case. The good guy takes the case in both, but the sleazy
Yes.
one is the Bogart in the Maltese Falcon, who becomes the lead character here. The sleazy guy doesn't take the case, and either way, one of them dies and one of them goes on. But the sleazy one is the main character in the Maltese Falcon. The sleazy one is kind of the side character in this one.
Well, I would say though that his partner in the Maltese Falcon, they kind of portray him as a guy who's got a wife, but he's kind of hitting on the other women, and so they kind of sort of show him as a little bit sleazy. But I agree that I think that there's a difference between Sam Spade in the Maltese Falcon and Jeff in this movie. That Jeff seems a little more noble in a way than Sam Spade does in the Maltese Falcon.
That's what I'm saying. Spade is definitely
Yeah.
sleazy in the Maltese Falcon. He's sleeping with his
Yes.
partner's wife. He's a sleazeball.
Yes. But I think his partner was also a sleazeball. So,
maybe.
in any case, we're getting off track there. But that was just something that occurred to me. There's a little bit of Maltese.
We never get off track in this podcast. What are you talking
about? Never. So anyway, using a combination of intuition and smarts, Jeff tracks Kathy to Acapulco, and he finally meets her. And he does a good job of convincing her that he's a lonely exile of some sort, and she recommends a cantina down the street and says she sometimes goes there. Then he goes to write Wit that he's found Kathy, but the wire office is closed. Now, is this fate intervening? This feels like a bit of a turning point here because he was gonna do the right thing, but then he says, I'm kind of glad that it was closed, and I suddenly knew why. And so he goes to that cantina every night waiting for her, and he already feels like he's a sucker. And she shows up, and they get to know each other, and does she seduce him? Does he seduce her? They both seem to have secrets, and they're both kind of playing innocent. They wind up kissing on the beach, and then she says, "When are you taking me back?" So she's kind of figured him out. She kind of knows the truth. And she admits to shooting Wit, but she denies taking any money. They wind up staying in Acapulco, and they keep on seeing each other. And Jeff eventually does wire Wit, but he doesn't tell him that he found her. So what are they doing? They're kind of having a secret relationship here. But he doesn't know where she lives. He doesn't try to follow her home. He kind of just lets it happen. Doesn't know what she does during the days. And then finally, she invites him to her place. And it feels like the deal is finally sealed. They're now sort of as one. So Jeff says, let's run away together. Let's leave tomorrow. She's not sure that they can get away with it. You don't know Wit. He'll never forget. Everybody forgets, Jeff says. Not Wit. But she does agree to meet Jeff at his place tomorrow so they can go. And now, if we stop the movie right here, we kind of have a happy ending to a romance. Um, any thoughts on that up to this point?
Yeah, a lot more cynicism. And as these characters talk, they're just so cynical to each other. Even he's like, "Yeah, I showed up. I knew she wouldn't come the first few times, but I'll
Yeah.
keep coming."
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of cynicism, a lot of great dialogue still. Um, yeah, and again, who's telling how much of the truth is she actually telling him? So
Mhm.
it's establishing certain stances that she has. She didn't take the money. Definitively, she's saying it. He's saying she did. So they're
Yeah.
setting up that someone's lying. It's just a matter of who, and
Yeah.
it's bringing that element of like, who do you believe? Who do you trust? And it's setting up some of the double crossing that we're going to end up seeing a little bit later on.
Yes, for sure. And so, unexpectedly, the next morning, Whit and Joe arrive at Jeff's place. And it turns into what I would call a suspense sequence. This is actually a very effective section of the film where we know that Kathy's coming. She's going to meet him here. And meanwhile, he's telling Whit, "Oh no, I haven't found her. It's been a bad situation. I'm giving up." And but he knows she's coming. And there's all this great suspense stuff going on. And he sort of plays the role of a failure, and he doesn't want to spend any more of Whit's money, and he tries to convince Whit to drop the whole search, or at least let Jeff quit. And Whit says, "I fire people. They don't quit me." And he instructs Jeff to keep on looking for her. And he winds up leaving, just barely having missed seeing Kathy. So, very, very, I think, effective suspense sequence. And at that point, we do sort of find ourselves back in the car in the present moment with Jeff telling the story. And so it kind of feels like this was the end of maybe the first act of the story. Um, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, a lot of tension because one, you don't know if Kurt Douglas characters know how much he knows. Does he know that, Mitchum is seeing the girl behind his back? So the fact that the tension comes from, is she going to walk in at any minute? Because she's supposed to be there, she's supposed to be at the restaurant. He's trying to hide her cigarettes and different things like that, to try to hide evidence of her. He's trying to steer the conversation in a way where he can relieve some of the suspicion. And again, we don't know what Kurt Douglas character knows. Like we does he know what's going on? Is he just playing a game with them? So a lot of high tension there, even as towards the end where she actually walks in, he spills
Mm-hmm.
a drink to push attention away from her entering the restaurant. So yeah, the first really bit of high tension in the movie, by the fact that they fully established the situation and the characters, the circumstances, what's at stake. So yeah, definitely.
Yes. So after that, the couple goes to San Francisco. They're careful at first, but eventually they start going to racetracks and ballparks. And unfortunately, Jeff's old partner, Fisher, spots Jeff at the track. So the two lovers immediately separate. They know that they can't be seen together. They've got to do something. So Jeff does everything he can to sort of lead Fisher away and then shake him off his tail. And but he does say that the one good thing about Fisher is that he's a very good gumshoe. He's very good at this. He's good at following people. So finally, when Jeff is sure that he's not being followed anymore, he goes to meet Kathy at a mountain cabin. And in a shocking twist, it turns out that Fisher has followed Kathy, not Jeff. So now he tries to blackmail them. He wants the $40,000 that Kathy stole. She, of course, says she never took it. He winds up bad-mouthing her, and the two men get into a fight. And suddenly, Kathy deliberately shoots Fisher, totally uncalled for in Jeff's mind. And maybe this is where Kathy's really starting to show her dark side. And she sort of takes off in the car, and she leaves behind Jeff, the dead body, and a bank book that shows a balance of $40,000, which kind of reveals that she maybe has been lying. And again, we go back to the car at this point. So this is another breaking point. So your thoughts on this turn of events?
Another very entertaining sequence. We have crossing, double crossing, the partners are turning on each other, and we have a nice little fight scene with their stunt doubles, clearly. But also, we truly see her as a femme fatale now. Now there's no gray area anymore. She kills him, which does seem a little excessive, and she has the money, which she lied about. So there's no mistaking it anymore. She is a femme fatale, and she's danger, and she leaves. She leaves him with a dead body and alone. After he essentially gave up everything for her, he gave up his big payday. He's stuck with his dead partner. He has nothing, less than nothing than when he started.
Yeah. And what's interesting is he doesn't say anything like, well, I'm going to have to turn you into the police. Like they're just having a discussion here on, did you really need to do this? And then suddenly she takes off, so it seems, again, kind of uncalled for that she just sort of leaves him there like that. It's kind of a bit of a shock when it happens.
Like she never really cared for him in the first place, which, it's...
Yeah. It could be. And so actually, now that we go back to the car, in the present moment, where Jeff and Anne, they're actually arriving at the Lake Tahoe mansion. And this is actually the end of the flashback sequence. So we are now going forward. We're in the present. So...
are you saying we're out of the past?
We are out of the past. Absolutely.
What was that movie that you loved? The Cat and the Canary. That's the one.
Yeah, that's right. The Cat and the Canary. Yes.
Oh,
love
God.
Love that. So Anne leaves him at Whit's estate, and he goes in, and a cheerful Whit seems happy to see Jeff. And Jeff apologizes for maybe hurting his feelings before, and Whit says, hey, he doesn't have any. And he wants Jeff's help again. And he explains that Leonard Eels, a crooked San Francisco lawyer, has helped Whit to dodge a $1 million tax bill. But unfortunately, he's now blackmailing him for $200,000. So rather than pay him, Whit wants Jeff to recover the incriminating records so that he won't have to pay him. And Jeff says no. And as they sit down to breakfast, Kathy appears in a bit of a shocking moment. And Whit says she's back in the fold. And you are too, he says to Jeff, who seems to kind of resign himself in this moment. And then he says, you see, Jeff, you owe me something. And you'll never be happy until you square yourself. So once again, it's kind of implying Jeff is a good guy. And it's probably true that he won't feel right about it because he did kind of do wrong to the guy. So, maybe he does owe him something. And Whit winds up summing it up as, that settles it. You're working for me. And so Whit plans to send Jeff to San Francisco to see Eel's secretary, whose name is Mita Carson, and she will explain everything. So Jeff says, all right, well, I need to get some sleep, because they've just driven all night, right? They drove all night to get here, and now they're having breakfast, but he hasn't slept, so he wants to go to bed. Kathy winds up coming to his room, and she tries to explain herself, and kind of prove that it wasn't all bad, that she didn't betray him, she had no choice, all that stuff. And he basically says, get out. So that's kind of the end of that section. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it perfectly sets up the rest of the film in that this character is completely over his head now. He doesn't know he's in a situation he can't get out of. He doesn't know who to trust, and he doesn't know what the implications are of what he's being asked to do. So it's definitely, the intrigue is high, the mystery is high, the suspense, everything is on 10 at this point. And another thing, Kathy, where did Kathy come from?
Where did she come from?
I'm trying to let you finish this.
Oh, out of the past?
Yeah, there you go.
Out of the past. There you go. Yes, she came out of the past. Yes, you're right. You're right.
And
She just.
Yeah. The one more thing before I let you give your thoughts. The dialogue, I have to mention it again. Some of the dialogue here is just so underrated, because the thing you hear about this movie is the formula is so great, but you don't really hear a lot about the dialogue. The dialogue is some of the best dialogue I've heard in a film noir. It's so good, you know. I think the line about his conscience, he's like, he left it in his bank book or something like that. But some of the dialogue is just so amazing, so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's one of my favorite aspects. There's so many great lines in here. I could spend all night trying to quote them all, but yeah, there's so many great lines. So in San Francisco, Eel's secretary, Mita Carson, explains the plan to Jeff. He will pick her up at the Eel's house, and while he's there, maybe look around. And then in a couple of days, he'll go back to steal the papers. Something about the plan just seems a little off. And Jeff says, just remember, I'm getting out of this in one piece. So afterwards, he finds a cab driver who turns out to be an old friend. And he tells the cab driver that he suspects he's being framed. And that night at Eel's apartment, Jeff does his best to kind of mess with the plan. And he winds up dropping a bunch of hints, hoping to alert Eel's that he's in danger. He says, it could be that I'm the patsy and you're on the spot. Keep the martinis dry, I'll be back. And after they leave, Mita sends Jeff to wait at the hotel, but he trails Mita instead. She goes to Eel's office and comes out with a briefcase. Could that have the papers in it? Jeff returns to Eel's place, but it's too late. He finds him dead. So he hides the body, once again, kind of messing with the plan. In Mita's apartment, Jeff overhears Kathy arranging for the discovery of Eel's body. And when the hidden body is not found, she sort of believes that Eel's has escaped, that he's still alive. So Jeff confronts her, and Kathy kind of admits that, yeah, you know, this is a bit of a setup, and they've given Whit a signed affidavit that swears he is the one who killed Fisher. But she seems to think they can start all over again in spite of this. And they wind up kissing, and she tells him where he can go and get that briefcase. And he leaves. Any thoughts on this section?
Yeah, very late in the film, we get introduced to another femme fatale in the secretary. Because we don't know where she stands. And then we kind of have an idea of where she stands until we kind of idea what's going on until he leaves the hotel room, and she says, well, she kind of implies, well, you're assuming this guy's innocent. He may not be as innocent as you're assuming he is, you know? So she's kind of implying like, hey, you may think there's a double cross, but what if there's a triple cross? Or what if the guy you're trying to protect is really like the bad guy, you know? So her dropping that little hint kind of like adds more like nuance to what's going on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You're right. He kind of knows, his character is in a sense where he knows like they're probably trying to frame him for something. And all he's trying to do is be an agent of chaos at this point, it seems. He's just going to
Yes.
mess things up as much as he can to get people to reveal themselves and then at least try to get some leverage or some footing or buy himself more time. So
Yeah.
this part during this sequence of the film is where I was like, oh man, I got to rewatch this film as soon as possible because I want to know what the end result is. That way I can better enjoy it because you're trying to figure things out as you go. It's hard to fully immerse yourself in what's going on because you don't know where things are going at this point.
Yes. And I think one of the critics at the time, who was very positive about it, he kind of said that, unfortunately, in the last half or the last third, it's very hard to follow. It's hard to understand everything that's going on. And it kind of is in a way, because this is a crazy plan. It's like, pick me up at his house and then we'll leave together. It just seems so pointless. And of course, he suggests that, this might be to get his fingerprints in that house, and sure enough, I mean, they're totally setting him up with the dead body. But
Yeah, I wouldn't put this in the category of like The Big Sleep, where it's just like, holy fuck, your brain's gonna explode trying to follow everything. But I would put this in the category where everything does make sense and it's executed really well. But the problem is you have to know what's going on to fully enjoy it. So it's convoluted in a way that's good because it makes you want to know, once I know the answer, I then want to go back without trying to think of the answer and just enjoy the experience. I think that thing you're saying about the critic, that's more of like a Big Sleep type thing where it's just like
yeah,
hopelessly convoluted but endlessly
yeah,
enjoyable. I do want
yes,
to say one other thing though, before we move on from this section, before you give your thoughts on this section. There's
yes,
one of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen in noir in this sequence here, where you have Robert Mitchum facing Greer's character, and we only see the back of his head. You see the raincoat, the fedora, and the outline of his face in black, and you see her face, half in light, half in dark, pleading with him and doing her femme fatale thing, where it's like, how much of this is true? How much this is false? How much is she trying to set him up? How much is she trying to save her own ass? And it's just like a beautiful shot that plays in well with the context of the shot. It's not just a good shot in isolation, but it plays well into what you're seeing on screen. And it's just so noir and so beautiful and great. I just had to highlight that.
yeah, for sure. There's a lot of great shots in here, I think, and yeah, that's definitely one of them. Um, yeah, so this section, you just kind of get the sense that he really knows that he's being set up, he's being framed, and yeah, he's just trying to mess with it every way he can to try and prevent himself from going down for this. Um, and yes, that briefcase, I mean, and I guess, we don't know for sure what's in that briefcase, but it seems pretty obvious that they're stealing the papers, and he knows he's got to get those back. So she tells him where to get that briefcase, and then after he leaves, Joe, from early in the movie, he arrives and he kind of makes it clear that he killed Eels, and Kathy's like, well, wait a minute, the body isn't there, are you sure? And no, he's dead, he's definitely dead. So they kind of figure out that Jeff's messing with them, and so they head out to maybe stop Jeff. So Jeff winds up stealing the tax papers from the manager of one of Whit's clubs, and he actually does it, and he gets out of there, and he gives the papers to some sort of delivery service, but he keeps the briefcase, and he carries the briefcase with him. And shortly after that, the thugs capture him. But the briefcase, of course, it turns out it only has a phone book in it. So they're kind of screwed. He's got the papers somewhere. They don't know where they are. And he basically says, yeah, well, I can give you those incriminating papers, and I can give you the dead body, because they don't know where the dead body is either. But in exchange for that, he wants the affidavit back that Mita put in Eel's safe, which is going to frame him for the murders. Um, and I think, this plan might have worked, but by the time they go to Eel's building, the police are already there, and so they're kind of screwed. They can't get in, they can't get the papers back. The police presumably already have the papers, or not the papers, but the affidavit. And so Kathy phones Whit and tells him, stay in Tahoe, things are all mixed up. And unfortunately now everything is kind of a mess. Do you have any thoughts on this section?
It's similar to the last section we saw. It's just more of the same, more intrigue, more suspense, more crossing, more double crossing, more trying to figure out where these characters stand, how this story is going to play out. It's good stuff. And it's again, this whole section of the movie, or this whole act of the movie, is what really made me say, like, okay, this needs to be in my top 5 film noirs, because how do you really improve on anything? The only flaw I really have with this movie is Robert Mitchum character is almost a little bit too cool. If he would have been a little bit more overwhelmed at times, or flustered, or like, look like the situation was getting to him, that could have enhanced it a little bit, because he plays it so cool. It's just like, yeah, he'll figure this out. It's like you want to feel like he's a little bit vulnerable to all this craziness going on. That would be the only flaw. Aside from that, this is great stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, going back to the slightly convoluted aspect of it, I almost missed the fact that they tried to go to the Eel's place and get the affidavit. I almost missed that. It's very subtle. They kind of show up and the police are kind of there, and they don't really make it super clear, but that's kind of cool. Things just kind of unfold, and they don't make it as easy as maybe some films do. But the end result of that is that Jeff is now in the papers, and he's wanted for the murders of both Fisher and Eels. And of course, Anne's parents are very quick to believe it, because they've already been suspicious of him as this mysterious outsider. And so they believe he's a murderer. And the police are kind of expecting that he's going to return to Bridgeport. And Jim, who is the other guy who's in love with Anne, he seems determined to catch Jeff, or put a stop to him in some way. So things aren't looking good for Jeff at this point. Meanwhile, Joe Stefanos, the thug who works for Whit, he is basically told by Kathy to follow the kid to where Jeff will be hiding, which is a gorge out in the wilderness. And the intention seems to be to kill Jeff. Joe has a gun and he seems to be taking aim, but then the kid spots him and manages to knock him off balance, essentially, with his fishing rod and the hook, and so he winds up falling to his death. And Jeff returns to Whit's mansion and kind of informs Kathy that this has happened. Joe's dead, and she kind of acts all innocent. She had nothing to do with it. She didn't send him there, but he doesn't really buy that. So they wind up talking to Whit and saying, hey, I want, he wants his papers back, and Jeff says, well, I will return them to you if you take the frame off of me and pin Eel's death on Joe, who actually did kill him after all, so it's not really an unreasonable request. Pin that murder on the guy who actually did it. And Whit kind of looks skeptical about it. And then Jeff also asks for $50,000, and he suggests that Whit will have to give Kathy up for the murder of Fisher. And Whit says he won't frame a woman, but Jeff says it's not a frame. She shot him. And He also reveals to Whit that Kathy sent Joe to kill Jeff, and now Joe is dead. And Joe, Whit is a bit upset by this and wants to know if Jeff killed him. And Jeff says, "No, he slipped. It's a mean river. I didn't get there in time." But he says, make Joe's death look like a guilt-ridden suicide after the murder of eels. And Whit is actually looking very surprised and disturbed by all of these revelations. And Jeff offers to leave the room so he and Kathy can kind of talk things over. Do you have thoughts up to this moment?
Yeah, so a lot going on here. So, first of all, that death scene was great. Great use of on-location shooting, a creative way to kill him. I mean, who would have thought that mute was a stone cold killer? And my God, that was some strong fishing rod there.
Oh yeah,
that could have pulled in a shark. How strong it was to pull him down off that hill.
Yeah.
But I love that sequence because it was unexpected. You don't really think of on-location shooting, clever shots like that, and that the mute was going to kill him. Like I didn't remember that, and I just love that scene. I wish there was a little bit more, because obviously Douglas' character is obsessed with Greer's character. I wish there were, obviously the way the story's told, it's really through the perspective of our lead. But I wish there was maybe a scene or two with them, just to show the dynamic of their relationship, where it's like, who really has the power, like something there that would have fleshed that out a little bit, because the whole inciting incident is him being shot by her and wanting to get her back, but yet we don't get a one-on-one scene with them together throughout the whole movie, which is kind of disappointing. But again, I get it. It's the perspective is through Mitchum's character, and that's the person we're following. So I felt we were shortchanged a little bit there. And also, it would have been interesting if he was a little bit jealous that maybe his henchman was having a side affair with Greer, which is one of the things I love about the lady from Shanghai, is the Rita Hayworth's character in that film. It's kind of like gray as to like who she's really, her alliances are really with, because theoretically she could have been having a relationship with any of the male characters or all of the male characters, and that would have made it more interesting in this film. Not that this film needs more twists and turns or whatever, but maybe him being jealous of like, wait a minute, they had a side deal, like, like, or was she sleeping with my henchman all the time? That would have been a nice little extra. But there's so much there. I'm just being greedy, but it would have added a little bit more of a twist there. Besides those nitpicks, again, great stuff. More of the last two segments you went over. Good intrigue, good suspense, good thrills, good mystery, and good execution.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that Kathy, thank you. Mm-hmm. Kathy, she says on more than one occasion that she hates Whit. She hates him. She shot him on purpose, all that stuff. But we never really, we don't know. Like when they're alone together, does she really hate him, or does she kind of like living with him? Does she like that life? We don't really get to see it. It's kind of off screen. But we do, though, get the one scene here, their final scene, although not all of it, mind you. We don't see the whole scene. But we do get a little bit of a moment here where Jeff leaves them alone so they can talk. And Whit winds up slapping Kathy. And he says, "You dirty little phony." And he proceeds to verbally tear a strip off her. And he tells her she's going to take the rap for this. And if you don't, I'll kill you. And he proceeds to go on to say, it won't be a nice kill either. It won't be pleasant. It'll be terrible. He really kind of lays into her there. And so then, he agrees to take the deal. And he says he'll get the cash. And he wants to know where the papers are. And Jeff says, well, they'll be mailed to you. And of course, Whit is a little bit skeptical about that, and he says, "Don't worry, I crossed you once. I know better than to do it again." And I think it's very believable. It's very trustworthy. Like he accepts that. So then Jeff goes to meet Anne in the woods, and they have a little scene together. And she basically says that she believes in him, but he asks, "Did you see her, Kathy?" And he says, "Yes." And she basically says, you got to be sure that you're not still in love with her, that you don't have feelings for her, and you figure that out. And once you figured it out, Anne will be here waiting for him. So then when he goes back to meet Whit and finish the deal, he discovers that Kathy has killed Whit. And she says, "You can't make deals with a dead man." And he agrees that no, you can't. And so now everything's screwed up. With Whit dead, the papers mean nothing. They're worth nothing. Joe is also dead. And there's just no way to explain these murders, and someone's going to have to take the blame. And she even goes so far as to say that she would make a good witness for the prosecution. So things are looking bad for Jeff here. And then she says, she wants Jeff to run away with her so they can start over again. So she's back to this idea. And she says, "You're no good, and neither am I. And that's why we deserve each other." And she kisses him. And so he tells her to go ahead and pack some things for him as well. And she goes upstairs. And then he dials a phone. Later, they leave in a car with Jeff driving. And when Kathy sees a police roadblock up ahead, she says, "Dirty double-crossing rat," and she shoots Jeff. And then she starts shooting at the police, and a machine gun basically riddles the car with bullets and kills her, and the car crashes. And when the police open the door, Jeff's body falls out onto the ground. And maybe I'll just pause there before we go into this final moment. Do you have any thoughts about any of this before we get into the last?
Yeah. I would say, again, I've mentioned a few nitpicks here or there. Overall, obviously, I love this film. I love it a lot. But I think all of the little nitpicks, or not all, most of the little nitpicks I have can be boiled down to, are you willing to sacrifice a little bit of the mystery and a little bit of the suspense for character development? Mm-hmm. And I felt this movie has so much mystery at times and suspense at times. Obviously, mystery and suspense are two completely different things, but this movie balances them well. Suspense is obviously we know something, the characters don't. There are plenty of moments like that. And mystery is the characters know things that we don't. So it's opposite ends of the spectrum, but this movie has both of those in spades. But I feel like to heighten those, you have to pull back on character development, because when the character development happens, we kind of know what the character is thinking. We kind of know where the story's going when you develop things. And I felt that maybe they could have pulled back a little bit more, and we could have known a little bit more about, like I said before, the relationship between Greer and Douglas. And I think even if they didn't do that for most of the movie, if they would have done that a little bit at the end and we would have saw the death scene, if they were to just reverse the order, instead of Douglas speaking to Greer, then speaking to Mitchum, if he would have spoke to Mitchum, said we take the deal, then spoke to Greer, then we would have seen their relationship play out a little bit, and we would have seen his death screen on screen, like actually seeing him get killed. Mm-hmm. Maybe his berating her pushed her over the edge and she shot him. Maybe all that like berating, she's not going to take him. She just snaps and kills him. Or maybe she does it in a more calculated way. Mm-hmm. Again, for the sense of, the mystery and like, oh my God, there he's dead. She killed him. We could have just seen it, and that would have given us a chance to see their relationship play out, and it wouldn't have affected the movie in a negative way at all, rather than having him die off screen. So aside from little nitpicks like that, I wanted to give my perspective on where my nitpicks were coming from, just so they're just not random nitpicks and make it seem like I don't like the movie. I mean, I love it, but just small changes like that sprinkled throughout the movie. Pull back on the mystery suspense, develop the characters a little bit more. That's about it. Aside from that, everything is great. You know, the tragic ending, you know, the Greek tragic ending, everything played out really well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that we do see that moment where he really, tells her off, and he basically says, "You're going to jail. You're going down for this, and if you don't agree to that, I'll kill you, and I'll kill you in a horrible way." It's funny that we don't see what happens in terms of her killing him. It is a bit odd, but at the same time, it does provide a shock. When he comes in and, oh my God, he's dead. It is an effective moment. Um, but yeah, it would be interesting to have seen that moment, see it play out. And I wonder, it's based on a book. I wonder if in the book they do go into that a little more, or whether it's a mystery there too. I don't know. I've never read the book, but
Because I mean,
and
honestly,
it's
what do we know about Kurt Douglas's character at all?
yeah,
I
he's a
mean,
gambler.
he's clever. He has some clever jokes. He's a gambler, but
Yeah,
um, we don't know like why he's so obsessed with her. I mean, he could have had any woman. He's young, handsome, rich. Like a
yeah,
little bit more of the development would have been. Again, this is kind of like how I was nitpicking The Exorcist and saying, "Oh man, like keep it more realistic." But then all these supernatural scenes are the things that people love about the movie the most. Maybe if they pull
yeah,
back on the mystery and suspense, it'd be a lesser of a movie. It's just
yeah,
an opinion that could be wrong. So,
yeah, yeah,
but I would have liked to know
yeah,
something about his character.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's fair enough. And yeah, he seems like a guy who really made good as a gambler. He obviously is shifty. He's willing to do things that aren't above
I mean, that's
board.
generic things that can be said about any bad guy in any movie. Yeah.
True enough. True enough. And yeah, what is it about the woman? I mean, Jeff even tries to say to him, "There's a million women out there, and they all look the same." And he says, "No, no, that's not true." So there is something about this particular woman that he is obsessed with, or he just wants to own her, just wants
Yeah.
to have her.
It could be like, if anything from like, oh, she reminds him of someone in his past, out of the past or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Or,
yeah,
the way she talks to him, like she's not intimidated by him where other women would be, or it could be anything, but instead we have
yeah,
nothing.
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. Um, and I guess you could say that it kind of happens again in terms of when we see Jeff dialing the phone, we don't actually get the information of who he's calling and what he's doing. And so then it's a surprise when the police are waiting for them there. So it's kind of keeping that suspense or keeping that surprise a secret, as opposed to showing what his real intention is there in that moment. Because you kind of think, oh, he's going along with her. Like he sees that he has no way out. He has no choice. So he's going to go with her. But in fact, he has decided not to, in a way. But in any case, after his body falls to the ground, and of course you're sort of hoping, oh, maybe he's not dead, but of course he's dead. His body falls to the ground, and that's it for him. So then back in Bridgeport, Anne winds up asking the kid if Jeff was going to go away with Kathy, and she says, "I need to know." And the kid thinks about it quite a bit before he answers, and then he nods his head. And she gets into the car with Jim, and she goes off with Jim. And the kid smiles, and he salutes Jeff's name on the gas station sign. And that's kind of the end of the movie. And so that is one of the questions. I think we've already kind of talked about it, perhaps in the other section. But what do you think about that? Like he says yes, or he nods. Do you think he's being honest there, or do you think he's lying there?
Well, I mean, like you said, we talked about in the other section, spoiler.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
well, yeah, it's it's what all great film noirs are known for, is that perfect ending, you know? Like with the last one we just saw where, you know, the guy goes and dies by the horses that he's been talking about the whole movie,
Hmm.
you know, in the asphalt jungle, in The Third Man, where, you know, you know, the Joseph Cotton character, like the woman walks away from him in that beautiful long shot. And you know, you have the Hall of Mirrors in The Lady from Shanghai that was emulated in Enter the Dragon and other movies since, where all those reflections of Rita Hayworth's character. It's like you need kind of like that perfect ending with these movies to really cement it as like an all-time classic and put it in that great list. And this has that. And that scene where it's just like, you know, literally and figuratively, there are no words, you know, because
Hmm.
obviously he's a mute,
Yes.
and they don't explain it. They let you let you figure it out your own. If you follow
Hmm.
this movie and you realize what type of character Mitchum's character is, this is what he would have wanted. You know, he
Hmm.
wouldn't have want her thinking that, like, you know, he died, you know, on his way to her, and you know he gave up all of this for her. Then she would have been mourning him for years. She wouldn't have been able to move on with her life. This makes it easy for her to move on, thinking, okay, like he betrayed her, he never loved her, he loved this other woman. That whole story he told me, like it wasn't really that true. You know, he didn't. He gave me half truths. So I think this is the benefit for her character, and I think it's pretty clear that this was a lie told for her benefit.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. And I think I glossed over it a little bit, but Jim, the other guy who's in love with her, he seems like he's a decent guy. He's an upstanding citizen. He grew up with her since childhood, and I think Jeff would even say about himself that he's done some bad things. He's a flawed character. He's maybe not necessarily quite as respectable. And so, in some ways, um, this is kind of her going back to the guy who she maybe should have been in love with and maybe was in love with before. And she's going to have a good, decent life with this guy. Whereas, who knows with Jeff, whether there's more that would have come out of the past. Maybe this was just one of the many things that he did in the past that could come back to haunt him. Who knows? Um, but I also wonder if the kid he thinks about it quite a bit before he gives the answer, and he must be kind of weighing the situation, and maybe he thinks that Jim is a good guy and that they will have a good life together, and so this is kind of how he can help them to do that, if you know what I mean. Um, so yeah, it's definitely an interesting ending, a good ending, and yeah, it's a good movie. Do you have any more thoughts about any of this stuff?
No, I think we went over it pretty thoroughly. Like I said,
Yeah,
I mean, I'd love to rewatch this movie and see where it lands on my list of you know, top 10 noirs. Maybe, you know, at some point we'll do a variation episode where we may not just review a film, we may just go into detail on what our definitive top 10 noir list is.
yeah,
Um,
maybe,
yeah,
maybe,
maybe we'll readdress it at that point. And if we do,
yeah,
I'll rewatch this in time for that and see how I
yeah,
feel. Because you don't know. I mean, you may, now that you know what's going on, you may watch it and say, yeah, I wish they would have developed the characters a little bit more. Maybe it's top 10, not top five, or maybe it's just outside the top 10. Or you'd be like, you know what, maybe I was wrong. And this was the perfect way to tell the story. And the mystery and the intrigue were better than trying to harp on character development. Just keep the pace going and keep you guessing. And maybe that's
yeah,
the best way to go. It's hard to tell until you rewatch it, but either way, this is a great movie. It's a
yeah,
great movie, and it's worth visiting, even though it's an older film. There's a lot of plot points, a lot of story elements that are still used today. You can look at a guy like Christopher Nolan, another guy who's not big into character development. He's more about the twists and turns and stuff like that. And maybe he didn't use this as a blueprint, but if you like his movies, you'll love movies like this because he's a guy that's like, oh man, I didn't see that coming, or I didn't see this coming, or this makes sense now. And, if you like
Yeah,
movies like that, you'll love this one.
yeah, for sure. In terms of nitpicking, one thing I meant to mention, did you notice that three of the characters all have kind of similar names that start with the letter J? We've got Jeff,
Jeff,
Joe, and Jim.
Jim. Okay.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of an interesting choice. Why did they name all the characters in such a similar way? But didn't wind up being a problem, really, though. It's just kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah,
But,
for such a tight script, that's one of the script writing no-nos.
yeah, exactly. It's like, unless they purposely wanted these guys to all kind of be similar in a way, or these are just everymen or something. They've all got these Joe, Jim, Jeff, John. We're missing John, but yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's a great movie and definitely one of the great noirs and deserves its reputation. And yeah, I'll definitely be watching it again. And it's a movie I should have in my collection, but I don't. And for some reason, it's gone to what they call the archive collection now. They're, instead of releasing sort of a regular type Blu-ray, you have to get it from the archive, so it's kind of like a print on demand kind of a service. But I don't know why, because it's a great movie. It's a classic. People love it. You'd think it would deserve a special edition where they give you extras and really go into the details on it. But right now it's just an archive release. So maybe something for the future. Who knows?